You guys ready to talk about Guilty Gear? There was a lot of discussion about the simplification of Guilty Gear. And a lot of people were very, nervous or afraid that the simplification of Guilty Gear meant that the game was going to be bad or the game was going to be worse or, there was like a lot of fear about the simplification of Guilty Gear. I think that's understandable, right? Wah variable wake up timings. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things, right? So here's what I think. I think a lot of modern fighting games have tried to remove things that they think are over complicated or unnecessary to the rest of the gameplay experience. And we see that pretty often in every new fighting game that comes out. It's very rare that a fighting game doesn't think to itself, especially in the modern age now, hey, there are certain parts about this game that seem complicated that we should remove. On one hand, a complicated fighting game is great because there's lots to delve into, and when you see the grandmaster level players, the master level players, you can just be in awe of how excellent they are. It's like I'm in awe of Nardi Gross dropping the tier 1. Thanks very much. But also there needs to be that thought that like, well, if we have all these complicated system stuff, we have all this and that, then it's going to be a struggle for a new player to jump in. And what's interesting is that there's always sort of the same conversation points around this, right? Where like some people will say, well, you should just have better tutorials and people will learn fighting games better. And then some people are like, well, the tutorials don't really help enough. You really need to do a better job of like having other built-in systems to teach them and doing a good job of like reminding them of that stuff, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's like always these kinds of conversations built around new games. Infilament says in the chat, there are many types of simplifications. Absolutely. There's simplifications of removing execution barriers, of removing variance in characters' moves and their play styles, and there's simplifications of unifying system mechanics so that all the characters have the same kind of things, or you can make it so that all the characters have their own systems. They're unique. A game like BlazBlue, all the characters are they all have their own kind of meter and system, and the things that they can do are also unique and different. Then you have a game like KI, which people wouldn't say that KI is a very simple game, right? I don't think Killer Instinct's a very simple game. But every single character follows the exact same combo rules. Every single character breaks combos on defense the exact same way. Every character has access to shadow counters, which is another system mechanic that's shared. Simplification isn't just unifying all options or diversifying all options. There's more to a game than that. Even Guilty Gear, for instance, people say that it's an extremely complicated game. It is. There's a lot going on in Guilty Gear. But they all have Blitz available. They all have YRC and RC available. They all have dead angles. They all have instant blocking and faultless defensing. And, there's like a lot of things that are system-wide in the game. I think when they say they want to simplify Guilty Gear, they could do the following things and it would be a simple game. Unify the wake-up timing, right? Because there's different timings for face-up and face-down and different knockdowns and all kinds of stuff like that. They could do that, right? They can unify the wake-up timing. They could, remove something like YRC. They could remove something like Blitz. They could simplify the weights. Yeah, weights is another thing. They can make the hurt boxes more similar so that character-specific combos don't exist quite as much, right? So maybe instead of the weight system right now where there's like 4 weights, I think it is, there's like light, medium, heavy, and then super heavy for Potemkin or something. Maybe there's 5. There's an even lighter one or something. They could make it to like 2. Guts. Yeah, make guts more obvious or make it more similar, right? Or something like that. Or make it so that there's not a huge difference between every character. There's like different things that you can do. If you did it to Guilty Gear, the game would be more simple, but obviously it's not a huge issue. Yeah, remove danger time. There's things like that if they did it, it would simplify Guilty Gear, but it wouldn't be disastrous for the game. And the other thing is that you have to understand about a game like Guilty Gear, right? And I think that this is something that's worth talking about in games and decision space. If there are lots and lots of decisions you have to make all the time, and there are solved solutions to them. If there are things you just know, when this happens, this is the answer. When this happens, this is the answer. That's a lot of fighting games, right? If you say, how do I defeat this move that this character is doing? You say, well, the answer is this. However, you have to remember with a game and a style like Guilty Gear, the speed of the match means that even if there are solutions or answers, making the right choice all the time in Guilty Gear is difficult. There's a wide decision tree. There's tons of different options you can use. There's tons of different things that the defender can use to counter the offensive player can use to counter the defender. There's so much. The decision tree is humongous, and the ability to choose and decide what you want to do based on what you like to do, what you think is strong, what makes sense for you in this matchup is huge. You know, Guilty Gear has tons and tons of different options. So it makes it so that when Guilty Gear is played at a high level and you see people making the correct decisions at an incredible speed, it's very impressive. But even at a high level, people will make mistakes because the pace of the match is just that fast. The speed and pace of the match mean that even if there are slightly less decisions to be made, there still are enough things out there. There's enough things to worry about countering. There's enough things going on that you'll be fine. If you remove all of these things and slow down the game, you'll be in a bad spot. If you have a game that is slow to play, and also there's a limited amount of things that are available for the character to do, that are good or that are worthwhile to do, and you have a very slow-paced match, reacting to everything that's going to go on the screen will be much easier, and so playing close to perfect is much better, so the game is much more solved. Guilty Gear will not have that issue as long as it remains the same pace and they have a similar amount of things that you can do currently. People say stuff like Dragon Ball is an extremely simple game. They'll say Dragon Ball is simple compared to a lot of the other anime games out there. But when you watch it at an extremely high level, there are a lot of options and the game is so fast paced. Being perfect in Dragon Ball is super difficult. Even though the game has been simplified, playing perfect in that game is tough. There's a lot of things to watch out for. And a lot of people will tell you in Dragon Ball, like, yeah, there are just spots on the screen where if you stand there, you don't know what the fuck you're going to do. There's dash up this, dash up that, super dash that. Like, you don't have a lot of options, you know, enough options to cover all these different things that are being thrown at you. The decisions are wide. There's so many different strong options that you have to think about. So when you're thinking about the design of a fighting game for something like Guilty Gear, as long as the pace of the match remains the same, the flexibility of the characters and the things that they can do is still huge. Even if it's smaller than now, if it went from this to this, that's not the end of the world. That's fine. If the system mechanics go from this to this, that's fine. If the pace of the match is still the same, you'll be okay. And Filament says in the chat, there are other benefits for wide decision trees too. They can protect the developers from a bad balance choice or two. Exactly. If you give your characters lots of different things and it turns out that some things are overtuned or some things are undertuned or like there's, you know, some things you've overlooked because, you know, if you put in all these different things in the game, you're balancing all of them becomes tough. It is what it is. It's going to be, you know, some hitboxes or hurtboxes or frame data is going to be messed up that you didn't foresee or predict or think was going to be as strong as it is or whatever, right? When you have lots of things available for you, if you have enough, you can get around something not being good or something being so good that, you know, you have to dig deep into your bag of tricks to find a solution to it. You know, I think Guilty Gear has a lot of that where there are just such powerful options in some characters and some things that you can abuse, but that if you dig deep in your option, you're like, well, actually, it turns out that Axel's 2K goes under this, and that. Like, there's always like some little trick or tool or something that to get around a lot of stuff, you know? There's a long time ago, I remember something about Daigo saying that like fighting games are really boring when the best option is to do nothing, right? Fighting games are bad when the best option is to do nothing. And I agree. Just like I agree that Chuck and Action is very kind for dropping the 6 months. Thanks very much. Doing nothing as a choice is great when you do it sometimes. Going bananas and going crazy as a choice and that being the best thing to do is great when that also works sometimes. But the point is that there should be a wide amount of decisions you can make. That's how games are balanced well. When there's lots of varying play styles, there's lots of decisions to be made. I think a good example of game design that people really enjoy, and that is an example of having a wide decision tree and how it makes the game unique, is Unis Vorpal cycle. Vorpal. So if you don't know how Vorpal works, at the bottom of the screen in Unis, there's a little bubble, and it's a timer, and it builds up. When the timer builds up, whoever has more of these little grid blocks, which is a meter at the bottom, wins Vorpal. And that gives you a screen freeze that you can do that builds you meter, and you know you can extend combos. You can do pressure, kind of like a YRC in Guilty Gear, or like an FADC in Street Fighter 4, or like a V-trigger cancel. Think about it like that. So it's like a mechanic like that. And what it is it's at the bottom of the screen. It's separate from your super meter. It's essentially just a tug of war that you're playing with your opponent back and forth, right? It's a really unique system, as unique as Shorin's for dropping the Twitch Prime. Thanks very much. Because this thing exists at the bottom of the screen, the decisions that players have to make in Unis will always be interesting. While you're fighting someone in Unis and you're battling back and forth, you have to make all the choices you have to make in a normal fighting game. Do I move forward here? Do I contest here? Do I try to swing here? Do I risk a reversal? Where do I put myself on screen? And at the very bottom, there's another system mechanic you have to think about. Outside of fighting this character's a zoner, this character's a rushdown, this character can do this, these are all the threats, you also have to consider the Vorpal cycle. And think about, what should I do to the Vorpal? Should I run up and try to shield something to build Vorpal? Should I run back and try to concentrate to build Vorpal? And there's decisions you have to make in that situation. And when you, the player, ask yourself, is this the correct choice to do this? The answer is not yes, and the answer is not no. The answer is, well, sometimes, or maybe in this scenario, yes, or maybe in this scenario, no. And knowing that in the middle of the match is so hard. It's so difficult to make decisions that are, I should drop my combo early to concentrate, or I should try to do this, or I should try to do that. The answer is never as black and white as always yes, always no. Or in this scenario, yes, in this scenario, no. It's always flexible based on the match. Because sometimes you'll say, well, I'm going to give up screen position to concentrate and build Vorpal. And then you do that, you build grid, you win the Vorpal cycle, and then you get hit. You get put into Oki, and then you die. And you're like, well, I thought that doing that in that scenario was right, but it turned out that it didn't work out, so maybe it was wrong. And then also you're like, well, maybe it was still the right decision. And I just should have been better on defense and blocked the mix-up. And that Vorpal existing at the bottom of the screen will constantly make players have to weigh the risk and reward of all their actions and decisions. It makes an interesting choice. It's a lot like the breaker system in KI, where when you get hit by a combo, you have to constantly make choices on defense while being comboed. Should I break this combo? Should I not break this combo? If I break the combo, what's the risk reward? How much life do I have left? How much am I going to lose? Should I try to guess? Should I try to wait for an option? Like, there's that constant weight of should I or should I not. Infilman says it promotes creativity as well. You see lots of, wow, I wouldn't have thought of doing that moments. And those types of games survive for a long time. Exactly. Yeah, when you have that kind of mechanic in the game and you have that kind of like decision making forced around a moment like that, there's not always perfect answers or solutions. And you can just try to play it as well as you can based on the context of the scenario, but it always has back and forth between your opponent. And that's what makes it interesting. And that's what makes the game feel different at all times. I think that's also why people enjoy like parry in Third Strike, right? Or like there's like mechanics that allow you to navigate around certain other things that feel like they're probably too strong if something like that doesn't exist, you know? It's the same kind of reason. And yeah, and Phil says that's the reason that Eunice has pushed this to this year, and this is the reason people still love KI. Absolutely. I like the simplification so we can see fundamentals be rewarded. Simplifying fighting games doesn't necessarily promote more fundamentals to be good or bad. If a game is extremely simple and there's degenerate strategies in it that don't rely on fundamentals at all, they just rely on you doing some simple strategy over and over, that doesn't make the game more fundamental based. And also the concept of I want all fighting games to reward fundamental is not necessarily right either. You need a fighting game where defensive fundamental play is great, but also being a fucking maniac and attacking and playing on feel is also good. And the thing about fundamentals is if a player has 5 total options in a game and his opponent has 5 total options and he counters all 5 just by playing fundamentally safe and just sound and crushing all these options, that's cool. But if a game has 100 solid options, 100, and this defensive player, their fundamentals are so good that they can handle all 100 of those options, that is even more impressive. As impressive as Hauser dropping the 6 months. Thanks very much. There is an impressiveness and an importance to being able to handle all of the different options a game can throw at you and make it look masterclass. Think about somebody like Goichi, where when you watch him play Dragon Ball has all this offense, all these mix-ups that seem so powerful. They seem you can't deal with it. You just get run over. Sonic Fox just steamrolls you. He runs mix-ups. There's no stopping it. He did that to every other player in the tournament, and he runs into Goichi. Goichi's defense, in the context of all of the other options available, seems just that much more mind-blowing. There's so many different things that can be thrown at you. How could he do it? How in the world can he handle this? It doesn't make sense. It boggles the mind. People use fundamentals as a buzzword to try and not learn a complicated game. It's the same reason people say they want the next fighting game to be all about footsies. I want the next fighting game to be all about footsies. People say that when they die to things that they don't think are smart or good. And I'll tell you what, when you beat your opponent with your footsies or your fundamentals, they also think that they've died to something that's not smart or good. They think you're stupid for dashing up there, or they think you're stupid for just being able to walk back and whiff punish all me because your ground buttons are so cheap. Like, what you think in your brain is stupid and not good and not fundamentally sound is also like, you know, people are like fucking thinking the same thing about what you're doing. It's not that simple. And I'll tell you what, I like playing defensive, slow-paced styles in games. But that doesn't mean that I want the game to only be about footsies and fundamentals. Fighting games need to have broad designs where lots of different play styles and lots of different types of play is good. If you can only play footsie's playstyles when the game only allows you to play a footsie playstyle, you're not that good at that style. You can't adapt and handle lots of different things being thrown at you, a wide decision of options being thrown at you. You see what I mean? You can only handle a very narrow amount of things, which means you need to figure out why that's the case. Or maybe adjust your playstyle accordingly. That's not the game's fault. If you can only handle playing your playstyle in a small amount of options are good in the game. Think about the most beautiful defense you'll see in fighting games. When does it happen? It happens in games where offensive options are unbearably strong. When you watch Goichi defend against Sonic Fox, and he is just a wall. He's just sitting there, hunkered down, and he says, my defense is so good that no matter what you throw at me, I will survive. It doesn't matter. There's nothing you can do to break my defense. I am that powerful. And you watch other people fight Sonic Fox, and they're just getting ripped up left and right. Sonic Fox just knows. He just tears you up. And then you watch Goichi sit there, hunker down, and block through the most difficult to block mix-ups in the game. You're like, this guy is fucking incredible. When you watch Justin Wong's Storm fly around in Marvel 3, avoiding more Doom more missiles with it, and you're watching him run away from X Factor Virgil and survive through Phoenix, when you're watching him fight through these moments where there is this unbelievably powerful offense being thrown at him, and he is dodging and diving and finding the one moment where he can strike back, that's when you're like, holy shit. I can't believe how good Justin's evasiveness and defense is. It's unbelievable, right? But if the game is there's one mix-up, and you're just watching it, and you're like, well, I guess his defense was pretty good. There's only two options, and the one option that does more damage, he defended against. That's how it's supposed to work. That's how you design a game that's fun. That's why people loved watching Marvel 3 for all those years. Marvel 3 is not a game where the design of it is it's not a perfectly designed game by any means. When you watch Marvel, it's very clear how potent and degenerate some strategies are. However, it's a game that's extremely wide. There's so much you can do in Marvel 3. There's so many options that you have available to you as with whoever you pick. They just have so many different things they can do, which is what made watching that game so interesting. Is there bullshit and extremely powerful and degenerate things in the game? Absolutely. But is there also the creative freedom to handle all these things? And when you saw counters, the first time I remember seeing Justin Wong do he did this incoming meaty setup that would drop you into Tatsu assist against Virgil, that beats all of his incoming options, and OS is something to stop whatever. I was like, this is so sick. This is such a smart decision to counter such a silly character. So on the topic of Guilty Gear again, Guilty Gear is a game with extremely wide decision making. There's so much you can do in the game. And even cutting out little bits and pieces will be okay. I don't want too much cut out, but I think a little bit would be okay. I think you can trim the fat on Guilty Gear and be just fine. It's pretty tough for that game not to reward people for being extremely good fighting game players and being creative and coming up with interesting things when there's just that many options available to you with that fast of a match. Why not have an expert game? I think the game can still be an expert game. And I think even their current games, even if they're more simplified, you'll find that people still think them more difficult than a lot of other things out there. If they put Testament's legs on backwards, I'm going to be pissed and be blaming all of you. The thing is that nobody has ever really used the easy combo or stylish or whatever the fuck it is and thought that it was useful for the game. It never really works, right? It exists and you can mash on it and have some fun, but it will never lead to long-term growth and players sticking to and enjoying the game because there's an easy mode in the beginning. Unfortunately, that is not the key to people's hearts, right? Now game developers make the core gameplay easy. I mean, yes and no. I think that how easy Dragon Ball is or how easy some other games are overstated by some people. Dragon Ball is not a super easy game to win with at a high level, right? And win with against strong players. It's different at all levels. But Dragon Ball has lots and lots of strong offensive options that you can use. And by nature of being a tag game, there is depth in the decision making you can make in neutral in particular. Is it more simple than Marvel 2 or Marvel 3? Definitely. But does that mean that the core gameplay being simplified is a huge negativity to the game? I don't think so. I think it's actually in the right spot for a Dragon Ball fighting game, right? It's a genre that's it needs to be fast, it needs to be offensive, there needs to be good stuff in it, but you also need to, kind of make sure that you make a game that has lots of good options but is not overbearing. And I think they found a pretty good spot in there. I can't believe they nerfed Krillin Toki. I don't understand Ark's development decisions at all. Their game dev, like, as far as they are as like designing and creating beautiful games and making fun games, they're great. But as far as balancing the characters, they make the weirdest fucking choices, Toki, and I can't tell you why.